Chapter 1 The Raven's Dawn. The first light of dawn crept over Ravenhall's fields like a thief cloaked in ash, spilling long, jagged shadows across the dew-soaked grass. Each blade glinted like shards of obsidian, catching the sun's tentative rays as they pierced the eastern sky. There, the heavens blazed with streaks of purple and crimson, a wild tapestry unfurling to herald the sun's slow ascent. The air was a bit sharp and cold, winter's ghost clinging stubbornly to the breeze, though spring whispered at the edges with promises of green. Beneath it all, the faint tremor of Emberfall's heart pulsed, a subtle rumble from the volcano that loomed beyond the horizon. Its presence as constant as the tides, its silence both a blessing and a warning. Ravenhall stood at the edge of these fields, its black stone walls rising like the bones of some ancient beast, pocked with age and crowned with ravens that croaked mournful songs. The keep was a fortress of trade and secrets, its towers jagged as broken teeth, its battlements worn by centuries of wind and ash. Beyond its gates, the fields stretched toward the ashen plain, where the earth grew dark with volcanic silt, and further still, the obsidian mines glittered with riches that fueled Emberfall's dominance over the region. The island heart was fire, its soul was trade, and its people, tieflings and humans alike, carried both in their blood. Through the morning's stillness came a burst of laughter, bright and reckless, slicing the quiet like a blade forged in the volcano's depths. For young souls, their hearts alight with dreams of glory, clashed in a daily ritual of mock war. To them, these fields were no mere patches of earth. They were battlegrounds of legend, where heroes were forged in the fire of their own imaginations, their wooden swords carving destinies as bold as the tales sung in Emberfall's taverns. Talon Valenwood led the pack, 13 summers old, all wiry muscle and restless promise. His hair hung dark as the ravens stitched on his family's crest, a cascade of black that caught the dawn's light like polished obsidian. His gray eyes sliced through the world, sharp and unyielding, as if he could see the threads of fate woven into every shadow. He swung his wooden sword with a grace beyond his years, weaving through his friends with a hunter's poise, each movement alive with purpose. Talon was the son of Lord Alistair Valenwood, a name that carried weight in Ravenhall, yet he bore it lightly, his grin as quick as his blade. Beside him stood Cecil, 2 years younger, a boy built more for books than blades. His hair glowed lighter, kissed by the sun, a soft brown that framed a face still rounded with youth. His brown eyes flickered with quiet thoughts, always darting, always searching, as if the world were a puzzle he could solve with enough time. A worn tome peeked from under his arm even now, its leather cover scuffed from countless readings, likely a history of Emberfall's trade routes or a treatise on the Obsidian Pact, the ancient deal said to bind tieflings to dragonkind. Cecil's sword hung loose in his grip, a tool he wielded half-heartedly, his true weapon, the mind that unraveled chaos where others saw only mess. He was the thinker to Talon's fighter, the shadow to his brother's flame, and though he lacked Talon's fire, his loyalty burned just as fierce. Oren Harding blazed like a torch among them, 9 summers young, his wild red hair a match for his wild spirit. His freckled face was flushed with effort, his green eyes alight with a joy that bordered on madness. He threw himself into the fray with boundless fire, swinging his wooden blade in mad, joyful arcs that cared little for form or finesse. His laughter boomed louder than his clumsy blows, a storm of noise and motion that filled the fields with life. Oren was the son of Simon Harding, Ravenhall's steward, a man of ledgers and scowls, but Oren was all heart, a spark that refused to be dimmed. He idolized Talon, trailing him like a squire, and though his swings rarely landed, his spirit was a force none could ignore. Alira Reicheld rounded out their band, 14 and fierce, carrying herself with the steady calm of someone who knew her own strength. Her father, Old Tam Reicheld, brewed Ravenhall's finest ale, and Alira had inherited his quick hands and a wit that cut deeper than any sword. Her skin bore the warm hue of her human lineage, but her sharp eyes, green as the sea beyond the Ashenport, hinted at a fire that could rival any tiefling's. Her tight braid kept her dark hair from her face, and her strikes landed with cold, careful intent, each one measured, each one deadly. Alira was no noble, but she moved among them as an equal, her presence a quiet challenge to anyone who dared underestimate her. She carried the weight of her father's trade, knowing the brewery's success rested on her shoulders, yet she fought with a freedom that belied her burdens. Their battlefield was a ragged circle of earth, the grass trampled flat by countless scuffles, its edges marked by stones they'd piled as a crude boundary. At its heart rose a twisted oak, older than memory, its gnarled branches clawing the sky like the hands of an ancient warrior. Its bark was scarred with initials and childish carvings, Talon's bold slashes, Cecil's precise runes, Orin's wild scribbles, Alira's single, elegant mark. The oak loomed over them, a silent judge casting shade and secrets across their games, its roots drinking deep from the volcanic soil that tied Ravenhall to Emberfall's fiery core. To the children, it was both throne and sentinel, a witness to their triumphs and their failures. "Come on, Orin," Talon barked, his voice thick with cocky delight, echoing across the field like a challenge. He danced back, his boots kicking up dew, his wooden sword twirling in a lazy arc. "You swing that stick like a kid chasing chickens." Orin's freckled face flared red, hot with effort and shame, his breath puffing white in the frosty dawn. He heaved his sword in a wild sweep, aiming for Talon's infuriating grin but carving only air, the blade whistling harmlessly past. "I'll wipe that smirk off your face, you smug ass," he shot back, his voice cracking with the strain of his charge. His small frame trembled with the effort, but his eyes burned with defiance, refusing to yield. Talon dodged with a laugh, his grin growing sharper, his movements fluid as a river. He sidestepped Orin's lunge, letting the younger boy stumble forward, then tapped him lightly on the shoulder with his sword. "You're as easy to read as a tavern sign, Orin," he teased, his gray eyes glinting with mischief. "Slow down before you trip over your own feet." Alira leaned against the oak, arms crossed, her snort cutting through the noise like a whip crack. She wore a simple tunic, dyed the deep blue of Ravenhall's banners, its hem frayed from countless mornings like this. "Might as well fight the wind, Orin," she called, her voice dry as ash. "You'd hit that sooner." She pushed off the tree, eyes glinting like a hawk's, her wooden sword resting lightly in her hand. She circled the fray, waiting for her opening, her braid swaying like a pendulum with each measured steps. Her strikes came sudden and sly, low feints that drew Talon's guard down, high jabs that tested his reflexes, her blade hunting gaps in his defense like a predator stalking prey. But Talon was no raw beginner. He was a hunter born, meeting her flurry with smooth blocks and crisp counters, his feet light as a stag's on the uneven ground. Their swords clashed with a sharp crack, wood meeting wood, the sound ringing out across the fields. Alira's lips curved in a faint smile, her eyes never leaving Talon's, reading his every twitch. "You swing like you're flirting with the maids, Talon," she taunted, her voice laced with mischief, her blade darting in to nick his sleeve. The move was deliberate, a reminder that she could hit him if she chose. "And you hit like you're scared to bruise me," Talon fired back, smirking as he flicked her blade aside with a twist of his wrist. He stepped in close, forcing her to retreat, his sword a blur of controlled aggression. Who dare nick a face this fine? Their banter crackled like a fire, a game of jabs and jests as familiar as the fields themselves. The dawn light caught the sweat on their brows, turning their faces to gold, their laughter weaving into the morning's hum, cows lowing in the distance, a smith's hammer clanging faint and steady from Ravenhall's forges. Cecil lingered at the edge of the circle, his tome tucked under one arm, his sword dangling forgotten in his other hand. He wasn't much for swinging steel, but his eyes tracked every step, every feint, seeing the fight like a map unfurled in his mind. To him, it was a puzzle of angles and momentum, and he plotted moves in the chaos, waiting for his moment. When Orin roared in again, all fury and no finesse, his wild swing leaving him open, Cecil pounced, not with his sword, but with a fistful of dirt, scooped from the ground and flung straight into Talon's face. The cloud of earth hit like a storm, and Talon choked, pawing at his stinging eyes, his sword dipping as he staggered back. "Cecil, you little rat," Talon sputtered, blinking furiously, his voice rough with dust and indignation. He swung blindly, his blade slicing air, missing Cecil by a wide margin. "No rules in a scrap," Cecil crowed, darting away with a grin, his small frame nimble as a fox. He danced just out of reach, his laughter bright and unrepentant, the tome bouncing under his arm as he moved. Alira groaned, shaking her head, her braids swinging with emotion. "That's why you'd never make a knight, Cecil," she said, her tone half exasperated, half amused. "You fight dirty. Dirty keeps you breathing," Cecil replied with a shrug, brushing the dust off his hands. His brown eyes sparkled with quiet triumph, his mind already spinning new tricks for the next bout. A new sound cut through the fray, a lute's pluck, sharp and mournful, rising from the field's edge like a raven's call. Talon's eyes flicked to the source, his guard slipping for half a heartbeat. A bard stood there, lean and weathered, his cloak patched with colors that didn't match, his hair a gray tangle under a cap tipped with a feather. His fingers danced on the strings, coaxing a tune that was both proud and sad, and his voice, when it came, was rough as gravel but strong, carrying over the clash of wood. "Gather, ye sparks of Emberfall's flame," the bard sang, his eyes glinting, fixed on the four as if he knew their hearts. "Hear the tale of Roy Valenwood, the blade that shamed the game." Talon's chest tightened, Roy's name a hook in his gut. He blocked Alira's next strike, his grin faltering, and stole a glance at the bard. The man's song was no tavern ditty. It was a saga woven with Emberfall's fire, and Talon drank it like wine. In Ravenhall's shadow, where ravens take flight, a lad was born to wield the sword's might. Roy Valenwood, with hair black as coal, flame touched by fate, with a warrior's soul. His blade was a storm, his laughter a roar. In Emberhold's ring, he settled the score. Knights fell like leaves, their shields split in twain. His steel sang of fire, of glory, of pain. Orin froze mid-swing, his green eyes wide, caught by the song's spell. Cecil's head tilted, his tone forgotten, and even Alira paused, her sword dipping, her lips parting as the bard's voice rose. The first flame burned in his iron grip, as he danced through the fray with a jest on his lip. No magelock could chain his untamed spark. No veil of smoke could dim his mark. The Kingsguard called, their white cloaks spread wide, and Roy swore his oath by the watcher's side. Now south he rides, where the ember sea boils. His blade carves drakebone from raiders' toils. Talon's throat caught, his sword heavy as he parried Alira's half-hearted jab. Roy, his brother 18, broad as a gate, with a laugh that shook taverns. 2 years gone, he'd stormed Emberhold's tourney, unhorsing knights twice his age, his sword a blur in the melee. The songs weren't lies. Talon had seen it, a boy of 11, cheering till his voice broke. Roy had grinned, tossing him an apple after, calling him Little Crow. Now Roy was Kingsguard, cutting glory by the sea, and Talon was here, swinging wood, chasing a shadow too big to catch. The bard's strings thrummed, the song turning dark. Yet the silent watcher stirs in its sleep. Its heart pulse whispers of secrets deep. For every blade that shines in the sun, a price is paid when the fire's begun. O Roy, with thy raven's grace, will thy flame endure in this shadow place? Or will ash and sorrow claim thy name, and douse the spark of Valenwood's flame? The final note hung, heavy as a storm cloud, and Talon's grin was gone, his gut twisting. The bard's eyes met his, old and knowing, as if he saw the ember call lurking in Ravenhall's halls, the veil of smoke his father wove. Was it a warning? A jape? Talon didn't know, but the song's end left him cold, Roy's legend heavier than ever. The bard strolled along innocently towards the town. Orin broke the silence, his voice a yelp. "That was brilliant," he cried, swinging his sword like it was Roy's. "Did he really fell 10 knights?" "More like 6, Talon said, forcing a smirk, though the bard's gaze lingered, prickling his skin. "Don't believe every string plucker's tale," Alira snorted, sheathing her sword. "6 plenty," she said, her tone dry, but her eyes distant, caught by the song's shadow. "Your brother's no small name." Cecil stepped closer, his tone tied against his chest, his voice low. "That last bit, about the Watcher. Odd choice for a hero's song." Talon shrugged, uneasy. "Bards like their gloom," he muttered, but the words felt hollow. The Silent Watcher, the volcano's spirit, was no idle myth. Its slumber held Emberfall's fate, and the Magelock Council's ban on sorcery was its leash. Their laughter rolled over the field, a wave of warmth that pushed back the morning's chill. It mingled with the distant sounds of Ravenhall waking, the creak of cartwheels, the shouts of merchants setting up in the market square, the low hum of tieflings chanting morning prayers to the volcano's spirit. But the castle bells tolled, deep and grim, their bronze voices cutting through the joy like a blade. The sound pulled the children back from their wild freedom, reminding them of the duties waiting within Ravenhall stone walls. They gathered their swords, wiping sweat from their brows, their breath still quick from the fight. Talon sheathed his blade in a loop at his belt, his grin fading as he glanced toward the keep. "Time to face the beast," he muttered, his voice low, as if the castle itself could hear. Alira slung her sword over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing. "Those bells sound heavier today," she said, her tone thoughtful. "Something stirring." Cecil tucked his tome tighter under his arm, his brow furrowing. "Father's been pacing the halls at night," he said softly. "I heard him through the walls, muttering about the mines, the council. Orin kicked a stone, his red hair flopping into his eyes. Maybe it's just taxes, he grumbled. Pa's always cursing about those. Talon's lips twitched, but his gray eyes stayed fixed on Ravenhall, its black silhouette stark against the rising sun. It's more than taxes, he said, his voice firm. Let's move. They trudged toward the keep, their spirits still high, but tempered by the weight of the bells. The fields gave way to the cobbled path that wound through Ravenhall's outer village, a sprawl of timber houses and market stalls that buzzed with early risers. Tieflings with curling horns and crimson skin haggled over obsidian trinkets, their voices sharp with the cadence of trade. Humans hauled barrels of ale from Tam Reichold's brewery, their laughter mingling with the scent of malt and smoke. Ravens perched on every rooftop, their black eyes glinting like the mine's treasures, their croaks a constant reminder of the keep's name and legacy. Ravenhall itself loomed ahead, its walls a testament to Emberfall's fiery heart. The stone was volcanic, black as night, veined with faint streaks of red that glowed faintly in the dawn's light. Its towers rose unevenly, some squat and broad, others needle-thin, all scarred by centuries of ash and battle. The battlements were lined with iron spikes, each tipped to the raven's skull, a grim nod to the Valenwood crest. To Talon, the keep was a living thing, a beast of stone that squatted on the land, its cellars hiding secrets as old as the volcano itself. Tales whispered of the Grok Vasher, Orcish hordes who'd once ruled these hills with blood and fire, their roars shaking the earth before the Valenwoods claimed the keep. His great-grandfather had swung the axe that felled the last Archchief, earning Ravenhall and a lord's title, but beyond that, the past was a fog Talon couldn't pierce. What lingered in the shadowed corners where the ravens nested? What truths hid in the mines or the council's vaults? He'd asked once, but his father's glare had silenced him, leaving the mystery thick as the walls. Inside the keep's gates, life snapped them back to their places. The courtyard was a chaos of motion, servants hauling firewood, guards drilling with spears, a tiefling priestess scattering ash in a ritual blessing, her crimson tail swaying with each step. Orin's father, Simon Harding, stood near the stables, a lean man with a ledger clutched like shield, his scowl deepening as he spotted his son. His hair was thinning, his eyes a faded green, but his voice carried the bite of authority. "Quit your fooling, boy," he growled, jabbing a finger at Orin. "Stack the woodpile before I blister your hide." Orin's shoulders slumped, his fire dimming under his father's glare. "Ipa," he mumbled, trudging toward the woodpile, his wooden sword dragging in the dirt. Alira slipped away to the brewery, a low stone building where smoke curled from a chimney like a dragon's breath. Inside, old Tam Reichel hunched over steaming vats, his broad frame stooped from years of labor, his voice rough as gravel. "Stir that mash, girl," he called as Alira stepped in, his eyes softening despite his gruff tone. "And keep your head out of the clouds with them lordlings." Alira nodded, tying an apron over her tunic, her hands already moving with practiced ease. "I'm here to," she said, but her sharp eyes lingered on the courtyard, as if she could sense the same unease that prickled Talon's skin. Talon and Cecil marched to the training yard, a gravel-strewn square ringed by wooden dummies and weapon racks. Sir Gerald Arnott waited there, a lion of Emberfall whose name echoed in every tavern song. His hair was streaked with gray, his face lined with scars, but his eyes burned bright, and his broad frame carried the weight of 100 battles. He wore a leather jerkin, patched but sturdy, and his sword, a real blade, not wood, hung sheathed at his hip, its hilt worn smooth from use. "Listen close, Talon," Sir Gerald said, his voice low and firm as they squared off, his presence filling the yard like a storm. "A sword's nothing without a sharp mind. Stay clear, stay focused, that's what wins." Talon gripped his practiced sword tight, nodding, his gray eyes locked on the knight. Every lesson with Sir Gerald carved him closer to the warrior he longed to be, peeling away the boy bit by bit. He wanted to be like Roy, his big brother, the one they all looked up to, the one who'd made their father proud. Roy Valenwood was a legend in their eyes, 5 summers older at 18, a towering figure with broad shoulders and hair black as midnight. 2 years back, he'd been summoned to the Kingsguard, handpicked by the king's own captain after a tourney in Emberhold. Roy had unhorsed 3 knights twice his age, his lance shattering shields like glass, then danced through a dozen swordsmen in the melee, his blade a blur of steel and fury. Word was he'd laughed as he fought, bold and unbreakable, his dark hair streaming like a banner. When the king called him to swear the white oath, Lord Alistair had swelled with pride, his favorite son, marked for greatness. Now Roy guarded the king and cut down raiders along the Ember Sea. each letter from the south a scrap of glory that lit Talon and Cecil's dreams. To them, Roy was the sun, brave, fierce, untouchable, and they were moths chasing his flame. "Feet first," Sir Gerald said, pacing around Talon, his boots crunching gravel. "Spread 'em wide, knees bent, ready to spring. You're no statue, move like a wolf." Talon shifted, boots digging into the ground, the morning sun warming his shoulders through his tunic. He felt the weight of Roy's shadow, pushing him to be better, faster, stronger. "Good lad," Sir Gerald rumbled, his scarred hand adjusting Talon's stance. "Now the grip, hold it strong but easy. Thumb by the guard, fingers light. It's your arm, not your enemy." Talon adjusted, the wood settling in his hand like it belonged there, alive with possibility. He could almost hear Roy's laugh, see his brother's grin as he'd shown him the same grip years ago, before the Kingsguard took him away. "Guards next," Sir Gerald pressed, stepping back. "Try the ox, sword up by your ear, tip forward. Keeps your chest safe, sets you to strike." Talon raised his blade, arms taut, a spark of duty flaring in his chest. He pictured Roy in the ox guard, facing down raiders, his white cloak billowing like a storm. "Drop those shoulders," Sir Gerald warned, his voice cutting through Talon's thoughts. Stiff slow and slow dead. They drilled guards until Talon's muscles hummed, each stance etched deeper into his bones. Ox to plow, plow to roof, roof to fool's guard, the names as familiar as his own heartbeat. Then they turned to steps, Sir Gerald's voice a steady drum. "Feet win fights," he said, circling like a hawk. "Step up with your front foot, drag the back. Back off the same way. Flow, don't stumble." Talon paced the yard, gravel crunching like a war drum under his boots, his body finding the rhythm. He moved forward, backward, side to side, his sword a steady extension of his will. Sir Gerald stepped back, raising his own practiced sword, his eyes narrowing. "Now show me what you've got." They circled, eyes locked, the air crackling between them like a storm brewing over the volcano. Talon lunged, a fast slash aimed at Sir Gerald's shoulder, but the knight swatted it aside like a fly, his blade a blur of wood. Gerald's thrust came sharp and sure, forcing Talon to twist and block, their swords meeting with a loud crack. What clashed fast and fierce, a storm of strikes and counters that echoed across the yard. Talon's heart pounded, his grin wide as he parried and struck, each move a dance he was born to perform. A crowd trickled in, soldiers pausing their drills, stable boys gawking, even Meg the fishwife, her trout basket forgotten as she craned to see. Their murmurs grew, a hum of excitement at the boy who dared spar with a legend. Talon's sweat dripped, stinging his eyes, but he laughed through it. "Old bones creaking yet, Sir Gerald?" he called, his voice bright with challenge as he aimed a quick jab. The knight's mouth twitched, a rare hint of a smile. "You're still shouting your moves, lad," he replied, his tone dry. "Might as well wave a flag." The onlookers chuckled, caught in the thrill as blows rained down. Cecil, Elira, and Oren had slipped into the crowd, their eyes wide at the blur of skill. Cecil clutched his tome, his lips moving silently, as if calculating the fight's angles. Elira stood with arms crossed, her face unreadable, but her eyes sharp, tracking every feint. Oren bounced on his toes, his red hair flopping, a grin splitting his freckled face as he cheered Talon on. Then, quick as lightning, Sir Gerald flicked his wrist, sending Talon's sword flying with a deft twist. Before Talon could react, the knight hooked his leg, dropping him to the gravel with a grunt. Talon's blade skittered across the dirt, and Gerald's wooden tip pressed lightly against his throat, steady as stone. The yard went still, the crowd holding its breath. Sir Gerald swept his gaze over the onlookers, his voice calm but firm. "Even the best needs sharpening," he said, his eyes returning to Talon. "Strength's just noise without patience and grit." He pulled back, offering a hand. Talon took it, hauling himself up, rubbing his shoulder with a sheepish grin. "I'll keep that in mind," he said, his voice rough but warm. Cheers exploded, hands clapping like thunder across the yard. Talon and Sir Gerald traded a nod, a quiet bond sealed in the dust and sweat of their spar. The crowd dispersed, soldiers returning to drills, stable boys scurrying back to work, Meg muttering about her forgotten fish. Cecil, Elira, and Oren lingered, their faces alight with pride and mischief. "Thought you had him for a second," Elira said, her tone teasing, but her eyes warm. She tossed Talon a water skin, which he caught with a grin. "Next time," Talon replied, taking a long swig, the cool water soothing his parched throat. "He's not as spry as he looks." Cecil smirked, adjusting his tone. "You telegraphed that last swing," he said, his voice thoughtful. He saw it coming a mile off. Talon rolled his eyes, splashing water at his brother. "Not all of us fight with dirt, you little schemer." Orin laughed, his voice booming. "I'd have rushed him," he declared, swinging an imaginary sword. Bam! Right to the knees. "You'd have tripped over your own feet." Alira shot back, ruffling Orin's hair, her grin softening the jab. The sun climbed higher, bathing Ravenhall in gold, but the morning's warmth couldn't shake the unease that lingered from the bells. As the four parted ways, Talon's thoughts drifted to the volcano, its shadow ever present in Emberfall's tales. The Silent Watcher, the myths called it, a colossal entity slumbering within the mountain, judging the island's rulers. Its awakening could bless or doom them all, and the Ember Council's magic band was said to keep it at bay. Talon had heard the stories since he was Orin's age, whispered by priests and sung by bards, but today they felt heavier, as if the Watcher's eyes were on him. By dusk, the four gathered at the edge of the Ashen Plain, where the fields gave way to dark, volcanic soil. The forest of the blue mists loomed nearby, its twisted trees cloaked in a haze that shimmered like sapphire in the fading light. The forest was a place of whispers, its branches said to hold secrets older than Ravenhall. Tales of the first flame, when tieflings emerged from the volcano's fire, or the obsidian pact, when dragons gifted riches for protection. Talon had never ventured deep into its shadows, but its pull was strong, a mystery that tugged at his restless heart. Cecil nudged him, his voice soft. "Dare to sneak in there?" he asked, his brown eyes glinting with curiosity, though a flicker of fear hid beneath. "Not tonight," Talon said, his gaze tracing the shadowed branches. "But someday, maybe." His voice held a promise, a vow to unravel the secrets that bound Ravenhall to the island's heart. They turned back, passing through Ravenhall's gates, their laughter fading into the castle's clamor, hammers ringing in the forges, voices hawking wares in the market. The low chant of a tiefling priestess offering ash to the wind. Ravenhall was more than a keep. It was a living beast, its black walls pulsing with history, its towers alive with ravens that watched like sentinels. The brewery churned out ale that warmed the small folk, its scent weaving through the air. The forges spat sparks, crafting swords and obsidian blades that gleamed like night. The stables stank of horse and hay, a reminder of the trade routes that kept Ravenhall's coffers full. Every stone, every sound, told a story of Emberfall's fire and ambition. But the great hall swallowed them in a different mood, its vast chamber dim with torchlight, its walls hung with tapestries of Valenwood victories, raven banners clashing with Orcish hordes, tiefling smiths forging blades in volcanic flame. Lord Alistair Valenwood stood at its heart, a tower of iron will, his dark hair streaked with silver, his hawk-sharp eyes pinning his sons as they stepped in. His presence filled the hall like smoke, heavy and inescapable, his black cloak embroidered with ravens that seemed to shift in the flickering light. "You're late," he snapped, his voice a whip crack through the stillness, sharp enough to make the servants pause. His jaw was clenched, his usual stone calm replaced by a taut edge that set Talon's nerves on edge. Talon froze, swapping a look with Cecil, their earlier ease crumbling. "Hunting?" Talon asked, his voice catching, the word feeling wrong in the hall's heavy air. "The family rides out," Lord Alistair said, his words clipped and cold, each one falling like a stone. "Be ready in an hour." Cecil frowned, his tone clutched tighter. "But..." "No buts," their father roared, the sound rattling the hall's stones, his eyes flashing with a fire Talon rarely saw. "Pack, eat with your mother, then meet me in my solar." Talon's mouth opened, a question on his tongue, but a glare from Lord Alistair, dark and deadly, shut it fast. The Lord stormed out, his cloak billowing like a storm cloud, his stewards and squires scrambling in his wake like leaves in a gale. Talon blew out a breath, his heart pounding. "Something's off," he muttered, his gray eyes narrowing as he watched his father's retreating form. Cecil nodded, his voice low. "He's never this sharp with us," he said, his mind already turning, searching for answers. "Why the rush?" "No clue," Talon replied, his voice tight. "But we'd better move." Their room was a chaos of cold stone and flickering light, a cramped space warmed by furs and a brazier that spat embers like tiny stars. The air stank of damp wool and blade oil. The walls hung with childhood treasures, a raven feather, a chipped dagger, a sketch of Roy in his white cloak. Talon yanked open a chest, its hinges squealing, and flung clothes onto his bed, his movements sharp with frustration. He's lost it, he growled, tossing a tunic aside. A hunt now. The fields are still a swamp, and the mines are crawling with guards. Cecil sat on his bed, folding a cloak with care, his hands steady despite the storm in his eyes. It's not the hunt that's eating at me, he said, his voice thoughtful. It's the speed. He doesn't jump like this, not since Roy left. Talon stopped, a jerkin hanging limp in his grip, his brother's words striking deep. Roy was their hero, the brother they idolized, a titan of muscle and mirth who'd filled Ravenhall with light. At 16, he'd caught the king's eye at a tourney, unhorsing knights and breaking shields like they were twigs, his laughter echoing across the field. The king's guard came calling soon after, and Roy swore his oath in white, a blade too bright to stay home. Lord Alistair had near burst with pride. Roy was his golden son, the one he bragged about to every lord who'd listen, the fighter who'd never lost a bout. Now he guarded the king and carved his name in blood along the Ember Sea, and Talon and Cecil clung to every tale, dreaming of his shadow. Roy'd figure this out, Talon said, scowling as he stuffed the jerkin in his pack, the leather creaking under his grip. He'd lock eyes with father and dig the truth out quick. Cecil smirked, slipping a book into his bag, its pages yellowed with age. I and father'd call it guts and grin, he said, his voice light but his eyes distant. We're just yapping dogs to him. He glanced at Talon, his expression softening. Think Roy's riding back for this? Talon shook his head, yanking a belt tight, the buckle clinking. No way. Last word, he was waist-deep in blood, cutting pirates to ribbons. Father'd summon a storm before he'd call Roy home. A knock rattled the door, sharp and urgent. Little Jory, a scruffy serving boy with a mop of brown hair, poked his head in, his grin fading under their stares. His tunic was patched, his hands smudged with soot, but his eyes were bright with the eagerness of youth. Supper's up, stew and bread, he said, his voice quick. Ladies waiting. We'll come when we're done, Talon said, then eased up, his tone softening. Grab us water, Jory. Throats like sand. I am Lord. Jory darted off, his feet slapping stone, his small frame vanishing into the hall's shadows. Cecil watched him go, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Roy'd have him laughing by now, he said, his voice wistful. Tossing an apple, calling him Sir Jory of the Pots. Talon's lips twitched, a flicker of warmth breaking through his unease. Yeah, and Jory'd strut like a peacock, he said, jamming boots into his pack, their soles caked with field dirt. Roy made everyone feel big. His voice dropped, his gray eyes darkening. What did he think of father now? Snapping like a trapped beast? Maybe that's it, Cecil said, his fingers brushing the edge of his bag, his mind turning like a gear. Maybe this hunt's about Roy, a late raven, bad news he's hiding. Talon's eyes narrowed, his heart lurching at the thought. If it's bad, he'd raise the banners, not play at hunting, he said, his voice firm but edged with doubt. This is different, something he's keeping locked up. Their packing clattered on, the room filling with the rustle of cloth and the clink of buckles, drowned by the castle's distant buzz, servants hollering, a hound's bark, the faint chant of a priestess in the courtyard. Their bags grew heavy, stuffed with tunics, cloaks, and the small treasures they couldn't leave behind. Talon's raven feather, Cecil's spare quill, a whetstone Roy had given them years ago. When they finished, they slung the bags over their shoulders, the weight grounding them as they trudged to supper, questions heavy as their steps. The dining hall glowed dim, its long table set with simple fare, bowls of mutton stew, loaves of crusty bread, a pitcher of watered ale. The walls were bare here, the tapestries reserved for the gray hall, but the fire in the hearth cast a warm glow, its crackle a small comfort against the evening's chill. Lady Elise Valenwood sat at the table's head, silver threading her dark hair, her face still beautiful but etched with lines of worry. Her blue eyes, so like Roy's, held a quiet strength, but her smile was thin and forced, a mask that didn't reach her heart. Eat, boys, she said, her voice soft but firm as she ladled stew into their bowls, the steam curling like mist. Tomorrow's a big day. Talon poked his bowl, the broth untouched. His stomach, too, nodded to eat. Mother, what's this hunt? He asked, his voice low, searching her face for answers. Father's acting like the sky's falling. Elise's spoon wavered, a shadow of fear flickering across her face before she hit it, her hands steadying as she set the ladle down. He's got his reasons, Talon, she said, her tone gentle but final. Always does. Eat up. Cecil leaned in, his brown eyes sharp despite the hall's dim light. Is it Roy? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Did a letter come? Her eyes sharpened, a flash of steel beneath her calm, but her voice stayed soft. No words, Cecil, she said, her hands folding neatly in her lap. Fill your bellies, not your heads, with worry. Their looks met, her dodge fueling their unease, a silent agreement passing between them. They ate in silence, spoons clinking against bowls, the fire snapping in the hearth. The stew was hearty, flavored with herbs from the ashen plain, but it tasted flat to Talon, his thoughts tangled in his father's rage and the volcano's shadow. After supper, they trudged back to their room, the castle settling into a tense hush, its corridors lit by flickering torches that cast long shadows. The air grew colder, the braziers glow barely holding back the night's chill. Talon dropped his bag by the bed, his fists tight, his gray eyes stormy. He's hiding something, he said, his voice low, the words heavy with conviction. Something big. Cecil nodded, slumping onto his furs, his tome resting on his chest like a shield. His brown eyes stared at the ceiling, his mind churning like the sea. Aye, he said, his voice soft but certain, and it's got Roy's shadow all over it. A hunt's no answer, we're in the dark till dawn. They lay in the flickering gloom, the braziers glow dancing on the walls, painting ravens and flames that seemed to watch them. Sleep dodged them, pinned under the weight of their father's secrets.